Hi, welcome to Blogging Has TV. This is Culturally Determined. I'm your host, Aryeh Cohen-Wade, and my guest today is Ben Burgis. Ben, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I am a philosophy instructor at Georgia State University Perimeter College and a columnist for Jacobin and the host of Give Them an Argument, the podcast YouTube show. But also, I wrote a book.
Yes. I'm holding the book up to the camera right now. Canceling Comedians While the World Burns, a critique of the contemporary left, from Zero Books. And we've had Doug Lane from Zero Books on this show before. So thank you for coming on and talking about the book with me. So after reading the book, it seems like the impetus for writing the book, or at least part of it, had to do with a specific event with Joe Rogan and Bernie Sanders. Was that accurate or not?
Well, I mean, I think that this was stuff I was certainly thinking about before that happened, and even writing a book. But it's certainly a perfect example of the sort of thing that's driving it. Because. And in fact, actually, like a really perfect example because it's somebody who's, even among other things, a comedian, for the title of the book. But in general, the frustration that drove the book was that it seemed to me that way too many people who I agree with politically. I mentioned earlier that that I write for Jacobin. I'm a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. All of my political goals are pretty much what you'd think they would be from those affiliations. Mm-hmm. But it seems to me that a lot of people who agree with me about what we want have bought into a kind of counterproductive culture of moralism that is much more about evaluating people's moral character, trying to denounce and excommunicate problematic people, than it is about thinking about how to appeal to the broadest possible mass of people to actually achieve all those political goals, the goals that we care about: getting everybody health care, ending the wars, democratic socialism. And the incident that you mentioned with Rogan and Sanders is a perfect example, because I believe actually just before the Iowa caucus, Joe Rogan, who is probably the most popular podcaster in the world, said that he liked Bernie Sanders and he thought he was going to vote for Bernie Sanders in the primaries. And the Sanders campaign, of course, tweeted out the clip, clipped a little video of Rogan saying all the nice things about their candidate and saying that he was going to vote for him, and tweeted it out, which it would have been bizarre if they hadn't done. That's something you want to shout from the rooftops if at all possible, especially because Rogan is somebody who is a bit politically eclectic and could land in different places. And so it should be a selling point that this is the one that he landed in, especially because part of the premise of the Sanders campaign was that there were people who would vote for Bernie who wouldn't necessarily just vote for any Democrat, in a general election. And especially because Rogan has a vast audience of people who are in many cases not terribly political. So this sounds perfect. Like this is a gift from the gods. But the reaction of a lot of people was, oh my God, Bernie Sanders has accepted and even touted the endorsement of this terrible, problematic person, Joe Rogan. And of course, a lot of that was, ginned up by bad faith actors, supporters of other candidates. But what really disturbed me was that I saw so many people with that little Democratic Socialist red rose emoji in their Twitter handles who were at least taken in by it or going along with it, saying, yeah, absolutely. He shouldn't have accepted this endorsement from Joe Rogan. There are people in left media, who are saying things like that. There's somebody in left media who is like a host of a fairly, well-known left podcast, who is bringing up my defense of the Sanders Rogan endorsement in an article that I co-wrote with Michael Brooks at the time. Day before yesterday, because he was still mad about it, and it just strikes me as really perverse, because especially in this case, it's such a perfect instance, because anytime you're actually trying to take political power in the real world, you're always going to have to confront conflicts between values. You're going to have to make trade-offs, decide, who you're willing to, make alliances with and what you're willing to give up for those alliances. I don't think those things are escapable if you want to do real politics. But in this case, there wasn't even any of that. It wasn't like Rogan endorsed some Sanders after some process of negotiation. It's like, okay, well, you can't, you got to change your Medicare for all plans, so you're not funding, trans people's, medical, needs now. None of that happened, right? It was accepted for free, and it was offered for free. It was accepted. He said, yeah, great, thanks to have you on board. And that itself is seen by a problem. And the way that this connects, in my mind, to the larger theme of the book is that it seems to me that if you're upset about that under those circumstances, then I question the extent to which, in practice, you see left politics as a project to change material reality, and start to wonder how much you see it as a symbolic way of performing certain kinds of moral commitments without any expectation of meaningful payoff, which I get where it comes from. I think that the left, anyone to the left of liberalism, that's a perspective that's been really out in exile, especially in countries like the US and the UK for a very long time. And so I think that when you are that distant from real world power, it is natural to start thinking that way. But I think that the problem is that there's a vicious circle, because the more you are that way and the more you end up focusing on interrogating other people's moral commitments and say, okay, you say you want the same things that I do, but do you really? The less appealing that makes you, and the harder it is to actually reverse the original situation. That would be my kind of core argument.
Mm-hmm. So the book is from a leftist perspective, put out by a leftist press. It's meant for left. It's a sort of tough love letter to leftists. Yeah. I'm not a socialist, so I'm not the core audience for this. But and probably, I don't know exactly what the viewership of this is. Certainly, people who watch this on YouTube, I would say, are not a socialist. Maybe the other people maybe are. You can chime in the comments, expressing whatever political belief you want. But anyway. So I guess I have somewhat, I'm not the envisioned reader of this, but I thought it was interesting, and there's lots of stuff to talk about. So and it's funny that people are still mad about that the Rogan Sanders thing, considering a lot of stuff's happened, since then. Yeah. Certainly much more important than that particular media episode, like the global pandemic, and so this was like January 2020 when this little incident, in quotes, incident happened. So there's been a lot of other stuff happening, and the fact that people are still mad at you about that one particular article. I mean, we should, I guess, mention this. Michael Brooks, your co-author, he tragically passed away last year. So
yeah, he's been dead for several months now, which gives you a sense of how long ago all of this took place. And I mean, the context I almost don't want to explain the context because it's so stupid, but but I guess just real briefly, there was a video that's been going around the last few days, because I think it is from my perspective, in a grim way, kind of unintentionally funny, and I think a lot of people react to it that way. It's a CIA, the CIA put out this video about with this monologue from a CIA employee.
Well, we will. If people haven't seen this, I don't know if it penetrated into the non-Twitter world, but we'll include a link on the blog insight to this thing. It was put out by the at CIA, the official CIA Twitter account. It's like a recruiting video kind of thing. Yes, and
yeah, and it's like a recruiting video that uses every conceivable combination of buzzwords. It's the woman says,
I just made a joke tweet about this 20 minutes ago, so that's why I saw it. She says, as a cisgender millennial with generalized anxiety disorder, I'm proud to work at the CIA, and so that really set off. It's funny. Almost everyone seems to be pissed off at this one particular thing. Maybe some people in the middle, or centrist middle or something, are happy about it, but like people from left and right are both like, this is very infuriating for various different reasons. It's just funny.
I mean, it's just kind of funny, and from my perspective, I think it's kind of a grimly absurd like caricature of. I mean, it's basically like a joke that I think people like me have been making for a very long time about like how there's like a kind of liberalism that's all about trying to have more disabled transgender drone pilots. And it's like the CIA is like just doing the joke, but with a straight face.
Yes, there's a famous tweet that says liberals, the right is saying like, lock up all the migrants and like throw away the key, and then the liberals are saying hire more female guards. That's an infamous and very apt tweet by that guy Maple Cocaine. Is that who that was by? But you see that.
I don't think I saw it, but that sounds like a Maple Cocaine tweet.
Yeah, that you see that still popping up sometimes as it is. I think a accurate critique to say that there are some parts of the liberal world that you just want to see. That we're very happy that Gina Haspel, a woman, became head of the CIA and saw this as victory for gender rights and so forth.
So, but then as left Twitter will do, there was like the immediate thing, and then there was like a weird meta controversy about it, because basically, like, when some people like Glenn Greenwald were tweeted it out to basically make the exact point we've just been making, then there were other people who sort of, even though they kind of agreed with that point, were sort of still somehow mad at the first people because they interpreted what the first people were saying, or they found a way to interpret it as saying that it's like, I don't know, like diversity is bad or something like that. And in commenting, and this is my first mistake. I mean, I should have just like, as always, the right answer is just log off, do something else. But, in commenting on the meta controversy, I had said what I thought was a pretty anodyne thing, which is, look, everybody in this discussion basically supports, gay rights and trans rights and all these things. That's not the issue. And then this, this person got mad at me and said, well, you say that, but, you yourself, are belittling these concerns in your, defense of the Rogan endorsement. And that's kind of how it, it came back around, which is like, I've got to say is kind of infuriating, because one of the arguments that Michael and I, made last year is that if you want to, if you want to advance these exact concerns, inclusion for trans people in that example, then I think electing the candidate who said that who wanted to make all healthcare, including hormone therapies, etc., free, and who's been on the right side of those issues since forever, since like the 1980s, when he was mayor of Burlington, and it was like deeply unusual, right, for anybody to talk about stuff like that. Elected Bernie Sanders president, seemed like the way to do it. And we also, made the point that to the extent, and honestly, I think it's exaggerated the extent to which he has had, bad views on those issues. But, even if for the sake of argument, Rogan was all that bad on those questions, I think that the idea that the best way to persuade him, or, maybe more saliently, the masses of people who listen to him, to be better, right? If there is, if there are aspects of those issues on which they're bad, like the best way to get them to be better about it is probably not to denounce them and even when they offer to support you, to say nope. We don't want your support because you're a terrible person. That's probably not a way to get anybody to come around to your point of view about anything. I think a much healthier like way. I mean, and I mean, not that this is necessarily 100% effective. You can't, as Mick Jagger so wisely teaches us, you can't always get what you want, but so maybe sometimes not everybody can be convinced of everything, but to the extent that people can come around, I think that like having them feel like they're part of some sort of common, movement with you, and that you are willing to accept them while still having those other conversations, strikes me as a approach that's, to the extent that, either approach is going to bear fruit, one that's much more likely to bear fruit than just saying, nope, I have heard that, that not everything you've said about this issue is enlightened. Therefore, until you grovelingly repent, I will never have anything to do with you.
Mm-hmm. There's another example that you start off the book with, which is, I guess I had totally missed this one, but Louis C.K., cut a check to the Biden campaign at some point last year, and then people found out about it. There was an uproar, and the Biden campaign returned the check because I guess Louis C.K. Has been canceled. But there's a lot of interesting paths you could go for this. So I did an episode of this show in the fall of 2019 about cancel culture, and it was right after the incident where SNL hired a group of new cast members, and then one of them, an old video of him on a podcast or something, came out where he was making offensive racial jokes about Asians and so forth, and then that guy, he like lost, his contract was rescinded or something like that. And at the time I was thinking like, it's, cancellation broadly understood is hard to do for a comedian, because a comedian almost never has a boss. Usually they're sort of independent people, and they travel around to clubs all around the country in normal times, and you can't, you could try to have a campaign, going after like the medium-sized theaters in like state capitals across the country so that Louis C.K. can't perform there, but it probably won't work because, Louis C.K. still is funny and will draw a crowd, and so the theaters will make money. So you can't really do that. And then the SNL thing, like that, like, they hire stand-up comedians to be on the show, and this guy got canceled. So that was one of the times where it was like a cancellation happened, and then like someone lost a job offer very, very quickly. But it is weird that a lot of the stuff focuses on comedians and their various misdeeds, because like, Louis C.K. still has an active career. Aziz Ansari is this weird marginal case, but like he had a Netflix special, which he talked about his going through the ringer with this article. We don't need to get into all that, but it is, the focus on comedians is strange. But then you have Rogan, who's this hybrid figure, someone from the world of comedy, and then he was the host of Fear Factor, and I don't know if he ever actually was a stand-up. He must have been at some point in his career, and then has this podcast, the most popular one in the world, in which he maybe half the time talks about like MMA and psychedelics and stuff, but then also has on various, sort of people from the world of, politics and, the public marketplace of ideas or whatever. But he is maybe he's controversial in some because he said mean things about trans people at various times. I mean, he's also controversial because he is sort of friends or something with Alex Jones, who is maybe like the furthest person who, still sort of exists, has like a public profile, but is so far out into like crazy land and being a horrible person that like, okay, so if Alex Jones had endorsed Bernie, and then Bernie had retweeted the Alex Jones endorsement, which of course would never would have happened, then like it would have been fair to get mad about that, right?
I mean, I think if I think that in the case, I mean, where Alex Jones had, I don't know how that would have worked, right? It's like, like he'd somehow decided that like Bernie Sanders was the only candidate who wasn't a lizard person, and which
would have been pretty unlikely given what lizard people actually
given
means,
Alex Jones' views. That would be very unlikely to be the one he picks, and then Bernie Sanders, had said, thank you, Alex. You are correct. I'm not a lizard person. Then I could see that raising like some eyebrows for sure. Although I'd also say there's a question. I mean, even, like the Alex Jones Rogan connection is interesting because of course, I mean, this is part of why Rogan is controversial, that he has a wide array of guests, including some who I would regard as politically monstrous or just sort of weird lunatics, and also guests who I think are great. And he tends to he tends to do a lot of nodding along and not just, of course, in any conversation, right? I'm sure you could do a montage of me nodding while people say things I disagree with. It was like hours long, because that's
Right.
just sort of how conversation works, but he often conveys the impression, at least, of agreeing with everything that a particular guest is saying. There are notable exceptions to that, but he does often convey that impression. And it is like a really weird array of guests. Like, so for example, on election night last year, Rogan's guests were at the same time Alex Jones and Kyle Kulinski. Kulinski being a very left wing, I don't know if you'd call himself a socialist, but certainly like a Bernie crack kind of progressive commentator, and that's there's something very funny about that sometimes. I think that it really shows the way that Rogan is somebody who, as you say, he's at least as interested, in psychedelics, MMA, comedy, half a dozen other subjects, as he is interested in politics. And I think that he's basically like a lot of people, since very often, I think, especially, I'm sure other people do too, but I see my friends on the left doing this. We sort of fall into the assumption that everybody has a worldview. Everybody's like a socialist or progressive or conservative or libertarian or whatever. And the fact is that most people don't.
Oh yeah, most Americans, the political beliefs of most Americans would probably be contradictory, and the sort of thing where they just vote for someone because they like their smile or something like that. Like, most people are not thinking about this kind of stuff.
Like most people, and I think in this particular respect, I don't want to exaggerate his everymanness. I think that I think Joe Rogan is a very specific type of guy. Let's put it that way. But he is a type, but like the guy who's like, like you maybe meet at, your gym, and, you did mushrooms with once, and, he told you about the Mayans, and, that's, but like, he's also like a really good guy to hang out with, and like, right. You went to see a game together. But I think the sense in which he's kind of everymanish is that he is very representative, I think, of the way that most people are, in the sense that he has political reactions to things. He has political impulses, but he hasn't necessarily taken the time to think about it enough for those reactions and impulses to cohere together into a consistent worldview. And the reason that I'm interested in this sort of weird moralistic overreaction to Rogan type figures, or I'm interested in the way that the CK thing played out, or the Dave Chappelle stuff I mentioned at the beginning, or other cases, is not primarily that I'm worried that like any of these people that I mentioned are going to be like out on the street, and like that's at the top of my list of like humanitarian concerns about the world. To put it mildly, right? Like, I think that in some cases, people's careers, are ruined by that. Although there's also degrees of ruined, and and destitution is very rarely in the cards, right? Like Louis C.K. Has a lot less money than he had, but he's going to be totally fine in the long run. It's not primarily because of that. Like, it's something that. I sort of picked as the opening chapter as kind of like the intro into the book and for the title, because it seems to me that if you're interested in sort of a culture of moralistic nonsense that's politically counterproductive for doing the things that the left wants to do, then a sort of vividly, perfectly absurd example of that is getting mad about comedians, because like the idea that like you should be very concerned with like what the implied ideological content is of like a stand-up set. And I realize, of course, that the three examples that are mentioned are very different, because in one case, the Chappelle case, people are getting mad about the content of the stand-up, and in the Louis C.K. case, I mean, I'm sure everybody knows at this point what happened there, but I mean, that's what about something he did, not something that he said. And the Rogan case, it's more complicated. It has more to do with his other role. But certainly in cases where you're very concerned about comedy politically, I think that this is just the ultimate example of a excessive focus on morally evaluating individuals at the expense of like what we should be focusing on politically, because who cares what comedians think on some level, and I think it also maybe reveals something, and I think that in this part, to be fair, you said that the book is a tough love letter to the left, which is exactly right. But to be fair, some of what I'm talking about in the comedy chapter is, I think mostly about people who are more, in most cases probably just like regular, normie liberals, than anything to the left of that. But I think that there is something in the collective imagination of American progressives and the way they think about comedy that's like deeply weird. And what I suggest in the book is that the sort of focus on comedians who are regarded as bad is the flip side of this weird tendency to worship comedians who are seen as good. The obvious example would be Jon Stewart in the Bush era, who was sort of adopted as this like almost like this representative of at least American left liberalism, and as somebody who, in fact, large numbers of American progressives were willing to travel to Washington.
Yes,
DC.
You talk about that somewhat forgotten episode from 2010, the Rally to Restore Sanity and or Fear, I think was part of it.
Yeah,
and it was Colbert in his character.
The full title, because that was the Colbert
from Colbert Report, and
Fear.
Yeah, which actually my mother went to in 2010, and I did not attend. But at that time, if I had been closer to DC, I probably would have gone, because I liked Stewart and Colbert during that time. But trying to make comedians into leaders or moral figures is problematic. Not to use that word. That's the first word that came to mind. But it just leads you in weird places, because like stand-up comedians often are just reputable types. I think that's putting it mildly. And also like the comedian's commitment is to a joke and a laugh, not to principles of anything higher. And like, so like one of the things that is, it's complicated, but like, a lot of, so a lot of this book is about how the online left, and specifically like people who spend a lot of time on Twitter and cracking jokes and fighting with each other and wasting time on Twitter, how the incentives of Twitter are bad and distort various things. I definitely agree with that, and it's almost I almost think you could have gone farther with looking at how basically like bad Twitter is for almost pretty much everything except for Twitter itself. Bad for America. It's helped Donald Trump. It helped Donald Trump become president. It helped QAnon organize them. Probably happening more on Facebook and stuff. But probably for most people who spend a lot of time on there, it's bad for their minds and souls and so forth. I include myself in this. Also, it's addictive. It's it's a waste of time. You feel like you're accomplishing something, really you're accomplishing very little or nothing, or hurting yourself actively. Very little good ever comes to it for any individual person, whereas something bad could potentially happen if you tweet the wrong thing at any given moment. So, like, the rewards are super low, the risks are super high. It's horrible, and if, Thanos could snap his finger and it disappeared forever, the world would be a better place.
Sure.
So there's that, and I was thinking, like, so in some ways, like, sort of a lot of left people found each other via Twitter, and, like, the Trap House guys, I think, probably found each other via Twitter, or maybe the Something Awful boards before that. And so there's, from the perspective of a socialist, there's some good things, like people like being exposed to different ideas, or saying you should read this, or find out about this podcast, YouTube show, whatever. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. But it's mostly bad. And so, it just distorts people's behavior in all sorts of antisocial ways, and just provides the incentive to do things that in the real world are bad. So one thing Twitter rewards is like high emotion, morally charged content. Mm-hmm. And so if you are like denouncing someone, being like, this person like wants trans kids to die, like that's going to get 500 retweets. Where if you're like, well, this person has like some good ideas, some bad ideas, kind of a mixed bag, that's going to get 3 retweets. And it can go on any topic. It doesn't have to be political. I've said this before, like, when you see sometimes things trend on Twitter and you get like a little keyhole into an alternate Twitter universe where having to do with like K-pop bands or the Marvel Cinematic Universe or something. And the same kind of fights are happening when they're arguing about the characters in Marvel movies as when people on left Twitter are arguing about Bernie Sanders. And there's people who are like, how dare you think Hawkeye couldn't carry a movie himself? Like, this character is one of the most important. And so it's just like people, just like, the material form of Twitter encourages this kind of crazy behavior, and that is all bad. So, as a socialist, I assume you're a materialist. Like, what are can we look at material solutions instead of like saying, telling people don't do this, this is bad. Sure. Like, so one material solution is you like get the hell off Twitter. But are there other, how is there something we can change about the system or the material that makes it so that these sort of things stop happening as much?
Yeah. So there's a lot there, but I guess I'd say that maybe we should separate 2 different issues, which are going to be related, but analytically at least should be separate. One of them is what's wrong with the left, and the other related issue is maybe what's wrong with like the world that Twitter, and not just Twitter, but Twitter is definitely part of the toxic cocktail of factors. Has sort of given us in general, right? Like, and as far as that second one, that's where I get the most, at least short-term, pessimistic, because as you say, to do something about it, you have to change the material conditions that give rise to it, and that is that's tricky because I would argue, like really, putting my commie hat on here, that like to a great extent, like the cluster of cultural trends that we broadly think of as, cancel culture, which is an imperfect term for what it's supposed to describe, but for the sake of simplicity, like I tend to use it because I don't really like fighting about words when we can fight about things. Mm-hmm. That I think cancel culture is just kind of a general disease of our, neoliberal, late capitalist hellscape. I think that the factors that tend to give rise to it, I mean, it's not monocausal, unfortunately. If it were, it would probably be easier to fix. But the factors that give rise to it certainly include the fact that we live in an incredibly atomized society where people often feel most connected to others online. The fact that the social media platforms themselves, as you sort of suggested, incentivize our worst behavior. The companies that own those platforms, no less than the companies that sell cigarettes, have every incentive to make their product as addictive as at all possible. That's certainly not a secret. And right. as
cigarettes, I mean, at least you're smoking a cigarette probably feels good.
Yeah,
at the time. That's true. Even people who are trapped in the social media world are often miserable.
Look, I've had I don't smoke anymore, but like I've had nights of like, drinking, and like I'll smoke a bunch of cigarettes over the course of the night, and like that's at least a combination that feels nice. The like the Twitter stuff often
Right. If
feels
you were drinking and tweeting the whole time, you'd probably wake up with a different kind of
doesn't
hangover
really feel nice even at the time, and it feels even worse than the other one does the next morning.
Yes.
So, and I think that as part of those bad incentives, like, I'm sure you've read John Ronson's book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed, and in there he has this great analogy about speeding, like electronic speed signs that'll show you the speed limit, and next to it'll show you how fast you're going. And as you slow down, right, you'll see that the numbers coming into alignment. And one of the points he makes is that in principle, this doesn't seem like it should work. It shouldn't do anything because it doesn't give anyone any information they don't already have. The sign, like this posted speed limit, you can get that from a regular non-electronic speed limit sign, and every car has an odometer in it that that tells you how fast you're going. But somehow there are studies showing that this is actually effective in getting people to slow down because there's this, in that case, benevolent feedback loop. You get this like immediate reinforcement for slowing down as you see those two numbers coming together. Mm-hmm. And
there's maybe I forgot. I did. So that book I should probably go back to it. It came out in about 2010 or so, and it really anticipated a lot of what was to come. And he was talking about public shaming, related to how term cancel culture developed. But that's that. Yeah, I mean, but the thing with the when you see the speed number, how fast you're going on the side of the road, there also is some sort of public aspect to it, because the car behind you or something, or the people walking by can see how fast exactly you're going, and then maybe that is almost a slight public shaming that's involved in that. But it is also
there could be an element of it. Although I think my suspicion, and I don't know if the studies that have been done are fine-grained enough to show whether this is true, but my suspicion is that even if you're like the only car on the road, it might still get people to slow down just a little bit, just because there's that just tiny, stupid little, hey, good job, buddy. You're going the speed limit.
Yeah, it's almost like maybe the metaphor would be like if you are, happily scrolling and tweeting and faving and retweeting, and then there's a normal person sitting next to you, and they're like, hey, what are you up to? And it snaps you out of the the feedback loop of the system.
And I think the problem with a lot of Twitter's feedback loops are that they really reward our worst impulses. So, like an example that I did mention in the book because it happened too late, or else I certainly would. I don't think this made it into the book. But is a sort of perfect example of the way that this could work. Has to do with Wendell Potter, who used to be a health insurance executive, and in that capacity would lobby politicians on behalf of the industry, and then something like a decade ago he had a come to Jesus moment about the issue, and he switched career. He stopped being a health insurance executive. He resigned from that, and he has dedicated his life since then to organizations that all have the word single payer in their title, to campaigning for single payer national health insurance and trying to undo the damage that he did back then. And over the summer, I remember there was a time when Wendell Potter tweeted what, if you follow him, is like a very boringly typical Wendell Potter tweet. Right? It's the kind of thing that he says all the time, which is the fact that people don't know how much single payer would help right now during the pandemic is a sign of how many people believed the lies that I told when I was a health insurance lobbyist, and that's the kind of thing he says all the time. In this particular case, somehow the algorithm delivered it into the wrong lap, and this person who's I think they maybe wrote for Marvel Comics or something. They're like some 10,000 follower kind of Twitter account, saw it, had no idea who Wendell Potter was clearly, and quote tweeted it and said, "Oh my God, the fucking piece of shit actually admitted it," and had like 75,000 likes and retweets by the time enough people had told him who Wendell Potter was that he took it down. And what always hit me about that case is that it would have taken that guy literally 3 seconds or less to get this information. All he would have had to do is he saw the tweet, he would have had to just click Wendell Potter's name at the top of the tweet, and then he would have seen his Twitter bio, in which he would have seen organizations with the word single payer in their name, and he would have gotten a picture. And so my point here is not to like castigate this person, although also, do better, but like, my point isn't to like condemn like that person, but like think about the structural incentive, because why not, right? Like, why is it that in so many of these cases it would just take the tiniest amount of like, I wonder if like there might be context here that might help me understand this differently.
Right. Well, if this Marvel Comics writer or something, let's say this person is sort of like amoral and all they care about is getting more followers on Twitter, then they made the right move because they got massively retweeted and they probably picked up 50 or 100 more followers because the tweet, the algorithm promoted the tweet and so forth. So the system, the world inside Twitter is set up to make that sort of thing.
Yeah, and it could be very well be that in this guy's head, he was like he's very comfortable and was very comfortable in his belief that he's promoting justice in the world.
Most people are probably most of the time.
Yeah, exactly. I think more often than not, like everybody's got a story to tell themselves about why they're doing that, but because the malevolent, feedback loop in the Twitter case is you get that little endorphin rush from those, all those likes and retweets, for throwing the first stone in a pylon. And so that really encourages it. I would also say that the sort of toxic cocktail factors that helps make all this so bad is that as much as you could say, just log off, whatever, it's not a big deal, that most Americans work in non-unionized workplaces with at-will employment. So oftentimes people are like rightly terrified that if people mob them on Twitter and the wrong person sees it, or even the wrong person is made to see it intentionally through doxing, that this will have offline consequences for them. And I think the problem is to change that larger like cultural problem. You would have to change the material conditions. You'd have to change do things like end at-will employment, rebuild the labor movement in that last example. Maybe change the way that Twitter works, possibly by changing the ownership structure, so it's not a for-profit corporation that has a constant incentive to try to make their product as addictive as at all possible, etc. And of course that's a larger political project and one that I'm committed to, but it's certainly a long-term effort. Then the slightly different, though overlapping question is what's wrong with the left. And part of what's wrong with the left is just that the same trends that infect everybody infect us, because how could they not? So like in that John Ronston book, one of the most harrowing stories in there is the cancellation of Lindsay Stone for taking a jokey, for her friend taking a jokey photo of her in front of the Silence and Respect sign at Arlington National Cemetery. And in that case, it was like conservative, patriotic military veterans, who were doing the canceling. So, it's certainly something that impacts the whole political spectrum. So of course it's going to impact us. But also I think this overlaps with problems that are more specific to the left,
right?
Which I was kind of trying to suggest earlier, because I think that there's also this broader phenomenon that that I would argue is at least a thing that ties together all of the disparate pathologies of the left that I'm complaining about in the book, which is what I kind of call the pathologies of powerlessness, the ways that because anybody with political goals to the left of liberalism, certainly at least in the countries that I'm most familiar with, places like the US and the UK, and in different ways in other places, but certainly there, that the left has been wandering around in the desert for a very long time. Like even people like Bernie Sanders in the US or Jeremy Corbyn in the UK, who I at least would regard as good, honorable left social democrats, spent the vast majority of their lives as extremely marginal backbenchers. And anything that was more radical than that, was completely off the table in the sort of end of history era after the end of the Cold War. And because of that, I think that there's this real temptation to start to think of left politics through this primarily symbolic moral framing. So like my friend Daniel Bessner will always point out.
Previous guest of the show.
Yeah, love Danny. So he has, and he'll always point out, right? So when you read like Noam Chomsky, and I love Chomsky, and I know Danny does also, but like when you read Noam Chomsky, there's never a point where like on page 198 or something, Chomsky pauses to say, well, if a socialist government took power, here's how it would handle that situation. And the reason I think that like just doesn't even kind of seemingly enter into Chomsky's head is not, I think, that the answers to those things are obvious, or at least I hope he doesn't think that, right? I mean, like some of these things are incredibly complicated and difficult. Trying to, as Danny always says, like trying to think about how winding down American empire would actually work in practice. But because I think it would have saying like, okay, if a socialist government took power, here's how it would handle this like difficult foreign policy problem, would seem sort of weirdly irrelevant for most of certainly Chomsky's long career. It would be like saying, well, the day I'm enthroned as the emperor of the galaxy, here's what I'm going to do. And I totally understand that. But the problem is that when you basically reduce left politics to taking a kind of symbolic stand against the many injustices of the world, then you not only don't worry about things that you're doing that might alienate, people that you want to appeal to. You don't worry about, how to try to reach more people. You actually have the opposite psychological incentive, maybe, which is to really spend a lot of time saying, okay, well, look, I am taking this great, moral stand, and you say you are, but like let's look into that, right? Are you really, right? Like, are you taking a sufficient one? And so that leads into some of the kind of left manifestations of cancel culture, but I also think it ties together a lot of other things, that like the ways that a lot of people, certainly on the online left, are very concerned with like trying to defend the reputation of 20th century despotisms.
Right. So this is the tanky issue that you devoted a chapter to.
Yeah. Like that. There's something like really perverse about that on the face of it, because you think, okay, even putting the morality of defending some really monstrous people to one side, like there's something really perverse about this, because throughout the late 20th century, certainly, you couldn't have had like a Bernie Sanders presidential campaign in the 1980s. That would have been unthinkable. That somebody who openly called themselves a socialist could, win 22 states, like what happened in 2016, that you could have, several, people who call themselves socialists, in Congress, that you could have, Democratic Socialists of America start to become an organization that, even if it's, tiny by larger standards, is certainly bigger than, than any left organization in a very long time. That like you couldn't have had any of that, because certainly to most Americans' minds, socialism equals capital C communism, equals the Soviet Union, et cetera. And one of the biggest obstacles to any kind of radical critique of capitalism was, oh, you think so? All right, well, do we have a society for you? How do you like this, right? Do you want to live under this? And so one would think that the very as enough time has passed, as like the Cold War has retreated enough into the historical rearview mirror, that like a lot more people are open to some kind of critique of capitalism without hearing it as I want to replicate this economically sclerotic police state. Then it seemed like the worst, most counterproductive thing you could possibly do would be to spend a lot of time insisting online that no, actually, those countries were good, actually.
Right. I want to share a tweet that I I stumbled across a couple of years ago and screenshotted that. Probably this was a mean thing to do, but because it was probably just some 19-year-old. But it was this guy who was saying how disappointed he was to find out that Stalin, when Stalin married his wife, she was 16, and this was wow, how could my hero have
That's definitely
done
the worst
something
thing Stalin did
as bad as this? And so it's just history. Yeah, I think my snarky thing was just saying history is complicated, fam. So all of our heroes have clay feet, even Joseph Stalin. So I mean, part of this, and maybe this will be critiquing, adding a different critique, related but different critique, is there is a sort of romanticism, at least on some parts of the left, for radical movements from years gone by. So Jacobin is the name of a the leading left periodical right now. And you often, I think this went down somewhat, but you often would see people putting gifs of guillotines out there. And so there's, Che Guevara shirts, that's more of a thing from 20 or 30 years ago, but there's a string of, just romanticizing the, brief moments when leftists had power, and even ones that probably most people would agree today, like the French Terror, really screwed the pooch on that one. And, good intentions, I guess, but it didn't didn't turn out very well. It's just because there were so few successes to latch onto. People romanticize this stuff, and I think for the normie people are generally not on Twitter, but maybe they'll encounter some of this stuff. But the average person is not enthusiastic about guillotines, no matter whose head is being chopped off, and certainly not Jeff Bezos or something. The average American probably thinks oh, Jeff Bezos, wow, he made this company that I can order a book, it'll get here in 24 hours. Isn't that great? So just that sort of, and then any sort of, any small group, people who are on the most extreme can sort of hijack it and take it over. And that happens even more with the social media stuff of like I said, emotionalism, making the algorithm promote stuff. And so, if someone is all these people need to be up against the wall, that's going to get 100 retweets or something. Whereas that is very alienating to the the normie out there who doesn't know that it's all a joke or tongue-in-cheek or whatever. Yeah, right. Well, and of course, as you say, we do on the one hand want to make a distinction, between between joking and really meaning it. Although I think it's also when you look at some of these subcultures, I think that it's often a really salient fact about them that distinction is often unclear to both internally and externally. I think exactly where the line is drawn about what's a joke and what's serious. I think that whatever. Full disclosure. I write for Jacobin. I love Jacobin, but I think it's a magazine that's made amazing contributions to revival of the American socialist left. I've joked to people, if I'm hit by a truck tomorrow, I want my tombstone to say Ben Burgis, 1980 to 2021, loving husband, son and brother, was on the masthead Jacobin. But I do take your point, about the guillotine jokes and stuff. It's also kind of funny because in that case, that's a sort of there's a jokey association between
socialism and like a capitalist democratic revolution against feudalism, which is what the French Revolution was. But in any case, I think that especially when people aren't sort of like reaching all the way back to the 1790s, to sort of be jokey about that, but especially when they're talking about very recent history, it can that can often raise questions about where the like that line between joking and being serious. Like I think about the left-wing YouTuber ContraPoints. She has
also a previous guest on this program.
Nice. So she
before she became so famous that she wouldn't come on this program anymore.
So she has a recurrent character in her videos, Tabby, I think, who's like a sort of
is that the cat girl?
Yeah. It's like the ultra left, cat girl, and there's a line in one of those videos that always cracked me up, where the like Tabby is like has some sort of like Soviet iconography like pin or something, and Natalie is asking her, what's wrong with you? Why do you have that? She says, well, no, it's ironic, and and she says, oh God, not you too, because of course the joke is that sounds like the online alt-right, that is constantly playing with that, like, oh, it's a joke, except when it's not a joke.
Yeah, these concentration camp oven memes, we're just fooling around with all this stuff.
Yeah. So I think that what most concerns me about this, and the point is not to like, wag my finger at like anyone who's individually, I mean, look, it would certainly be like a pretty weird performative contradiction for me to get mad while I'm talking about this book about that it's not okay that you told that joke at that time, but I do think that as a larger phenomenon, that the prevalence of especially serious and ambiguously serious defenses of those Stalinist or quasi-Stalinist regimes is very telling in terms of this larger story about the left, because it's a manifestation of I think, at least among other things, of the same problem, that instead of thinking about how to reach out to the vast multitude of normies who might be ready to hear that that Jeff Bezos has way too much wealth and power and is not and is not a positive force in our society, and that he should have his wealth and power taken away. But are probably, like if you start talking about, killing people, I think most humans under most circumstances don't like it. That instead of thinking about how you're going to appeal to that vast multitude of normies, that if you are very concerned with signaling exactly how performatively radical you are, I think that's where you end up getting into either. And it's funny because these two things are opposite on paper, but sometimes I see the very same people doing them. Either sort of doing this weird performative thing where you defend these authoritarian regimes, or this weird performative thing where you talk like a complete anarchist who thinks that they're like, that we should abolish the police and we should abolish prisons and all this stuff, which, by the way, every now and again, it always confuses the shit out of me. But every now and again, I do see somebody who somehow seems to be both, right? That it's like, we should abolish prisons, but also, but also the Soviet Union was great. And I don't understand that one at all.
Yeah, abolish prisons, maintain the gulag, I guess would be the.
Yeah. Oh yeah, abolish prisons, replace them with exile to Siberia and
re-education and yeah.
Yeah, right. And And I think in both cases, it really does seem to more scratch this itch to show what an extreme stand that you're taking against the various very real injustices you're reacting against, than it indicates any kind of serious attention to how you would build a movement that would appeal to people to do anything about those injustices. Because, look, obviously, the Soviet Union is, I hope, no one's idea of a model for what a better society would be like. And on the other end, clearly, we better have some sort of way of involuntarily confining, even if you think that the U.S., as I do, is incarceration crazy, that we lock up far too many people for far too long for far too many things. But that said, there surely does need to be some sort of mechanism for removing, rapists, murderers, people who engage in domestic violence, etc., at a certain point from the general population, for the sake of public safety. You also need, on the way to removing them from the larger population, however nice and rehabilitative the place you remove them to, you better have something, or else the plan, I guess, is just to kill them, which sounds worse to me. And presumably, you could argue that, it would be so different from what we have now that we shouldn't even call it police, whatever. But presumably you do want some sort of publicly owned entity that is professionally tasked with enforcing laws, which by the time you get to that end of that sentence, I think any normal person would say, oh, you mean police? But if you don't want some sort of professionalized, publicly owned entity to do that, then I get really worried about what the alternative is.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone that flourished, using those words ironically.
That ended up killing an unarmed black teenager.
Yeah, multiple people. But there's a lot of,
a couple of others, but also just generally, sorry to cut you off, but it's just generally, that can't be the plan. That we just have that the United States just becomes a giant Capitol Hill autonomous zone, because one, I think politically that's going to be a tough sell for very good reasons, but two, I don't want to live in that society. The idea that that you would just sort of have informal civilian, patrols that that's how it would work.
It's off the wall. It shouldn't be. That sort of thing should be laughed out of even left spaces. But the people who are really into it will, drag your ass on Twitter or something. You say something bad about it. Not even sort of the autonomous zone stuff. Shortly after George Floyd was murdered, if you were pushing back against the people who are saying defund the police, then you were going to have an unpleasant day online. So it's sort of just shut up and go along kind of thing, because the people who really care about this are super exercised, and whereas the mushy middle, it doesn't participate in this sort of thing at all. And so defund, there's abolish ICE, that is right within the realm of human possibility, because it's just a governmental division that was created in 2003 or something. So that could happen, but abolish prison, extremely unlikely, and abolish the police, well, that's even more unlikely. And it's just so, it's bad that has taken over. That was a dominant message after Floyd was killed, because it's just not, it's never going to happen. And there's so many more productive things one could, or better slogans, but it's not there's no central authority for deciding what slogan becomes popular. It is a problem,
especially because I think that on the I think there's a defensible reading of defund. I even think it's probably what most people meant, but the problem is that there's this ambiguity there, because and to be fair, this isn't entirely a matter of bad faith misreading. I think it's partially a matter of that, but I don't think it's entirely that, because I have also seen before defund the police came about, sometimes people would use defund ICE and abolish ICE interchangeably. So, that is a thing. I think that, defund technically means like, spend, like cut funds from, right? And so then the question is, well, how much funds are we talking about? And oftentimes the suggestion was that, well, what you're doing is you're transferring money from policing to other things. People talk about counselors, social workers, like that you could have as the first response, at least, even if you still had the police as a backup for some situations that currently armed police should be sent into, which there are follow-up questions that you could ask and picks that you could knit, but I mean, broadly speaking, that's the sort of thing that I'm sympathetic to. I don't like the fact that people who threw it around often, and like I'm not just talking about marginal people on Twitter. AOC did this. Will often suggest that you could have all these great like programs and counselors and social workers and education and spend money on the root causes of crime, that you could do all this just by transferring money from police budgets, which just mathematically is bonkers. There just is not that much money in municipal budgets to do that. I think some back of the napkin math, you could cut the operating budget of the NYPD by 50%, and I think it would just like head off like the proposed education cuts that year. But like you certainly wouldn't be adding any new money. But I think broadly speaking, the idea that there was a turn towards a more militarized and aggressive style of policing and more incarceration that happened several decades ago, and part of the reason that it happened, and I think there's an analysis that's popular on a lot of the left, that it was just like that, like the whole explanation here is just like racist hysteria out of nowhere, and I don't think that's true. I think that like there were, like in the 70s, for example, I think there were real crime waves that people were reacting to that really happened. But also, I think you can, like the more reasonable left critique is, yeah, there is a part of the reason for this turn is that it's both financially and politically cheaper than having a more expansive welfare state, to try to manage some of the social ills caused by poverty that way. So I agree with all that, but the problem is, and the reason I think, especially at this point, that it is worth, thinking about other ways to say this without using the defund slogan, is that on the one hand, conservative critics of that would, maybe say for their own reasons, oh, so you're saying, we should abolish the police. That's what that means, right? Even though technically those are different. But the problem is that instead of like really aggressively pushing back on that in most cases, there's a lot of waffling about that, because for so many activists, their real commitments are like they don't want to say, no, I don't want to abolish the police, because they kind of do, or at least they don't want to alienate, people who do. And so you end up with, even though a lot of what I described, if you pull on it sort of a la carte, right? Like, you have explicit poll questions like, okay, how do you feel about having, that like sort of reducing police presence if it's paired with, blah, 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 right? And you have like various benevolent things like this. It doesn't, I don't want to exaggerate how much support there is for that, but it certainly polls better than defund the police does, because at this point, most people hear defund the police, and what they hear is let's get rid of police and just have it be, I don't know, rich people can have private security and everybody else is shit out of luck. And that's certainly not going to be a politically popular program.
Yeah, I mean, the slogan like reduce police budgets by 30% and redirect the money towards mental health, like that's harder. I mean, reform the police or something, or like fix the police. I don't know. And then you have like all cops are bastards, and the average American does not think that all cops are bastards. They probably have like a cop who they're related to. So that's also a loser slogan.
They don't, and it's also like a weirdly like, and actually like that slogan is like very weird too, because it's like, look, if I wanted to, I could give a defense of saying that wouldn't be entirely wrong, but also I think it's just like, it's like a weird hill to die on, right? It's like every single cop who exists is a bad person, and that's not going to like resonate with most people probably, because they assume that people are complicated, and two, that it's the wrong thing to emphasize. I mean, like the question,
it's kind of anti-Marxist.
Yeah,
Don't you
certainly
think?
anti-Marxist, because the question shouldn't be like what is in the heart of any individual policeman. The question should be how do the police function as an institution, and how should that institution be different? Like whether and surely the point, and like this is actually getting at like I think a big theme of the book, which is that like there is this weird way in which this stuff makes leftists sound like conservatives, because you think, okay, the like what conservatism is to a great extent at its core is about emphasizing individual morality, emphasizing, like, okay, don't blame society. Everybody needs to take individual responsibility, for what they're doing. The problem is, the problem is cultural. You need to, you just need to have better values. And without saying that nobody should ever take responsibility for anything, or that it doesn't matter what people's values are, because that would be going too far. But like, if without saying that, surely at least as a matter of emphasis, we like the kind of spiritual core of any kind of left program should surely be saying the opposite of that, right? Saying that no. If you're interested in social problems, what you should be interested in are social explanations and collective solutions. But insisting on all cops are bastards, like really just like, I mean, it's a really weird way of meshing those things, that it's like, oh, so it's very important that we think that every single member of this organization is individually bad, rather than there are things about the way that the organization works that lead to practices that we want to change. And I think, and it also gets especially weird, I think, on the more cancel-y side of things, when you think about things like a sort of weird left adjacent recent example. It would have to do with the magazine Teen Vogue, which is as weird as this is to say out loud. Teen Vogue is actually a place that has published a lot of like super leftist content in the last, like, I don't know, year or so. Like they have, I'm not quite sure what happened there, how that came about, but like you could read stuff in Teen Vogue about like, I don't know, like Karl Marx, or why we should have a general strike, or things like that. Like I said, it's a very strange development. And recently, like within the last month, they brought in a new editor. And by the way, I mean, it's possible that as far as the political subtext of all this, that like the people who didn't like this new editor they're bringing in are much closer to me than the people that the editor herself would have been. That she might have had a more centrist, worldview, but that's not the point of the story. They brought in this new editor, so it's like a 27-year-old, maybe 28 at this point, woman who was revealed. People dug up,
and this woman is black. We should know.
Yeah. Also worth mentioning. But yes, 10 years ago, when she was a teenager, she had posted some tweets that were like trying a little bit too hard to be edgy, and like edging into being mildly racist. That's sort of like bad, dumb things that, you could imagine a teenager trying to be edgy tweeting.
Right. And they were specifically making fun of Asian Americans or Chinese people or something along those lines.
Yeah. Asian Americans, I believe, was the issue. But also, again, 10 years ago, when she was a teenager, and she had profusely apologized for having tweeted bad things back then, but it was still such a controversy that she was she resigned, which, especially in a corporate context like Condé Nast, I often tend to read resignation as a nice way of firing somebody. We'll let you resign, but at best, right, she resigned under pressure, and it strikes me that there's something like really weird about this, because surely everybody who's mad about this is opposed to mass incarceration, thinks that, again, America is just way too incarceration happy, and that if they're not prison abolitionists, they think that prisons should at least be much more humane and rehabilitative, that, everybody should get a second chance, that we should ban that box on employment forms, about, whether you've been convicted of crimes in the past, in order that everybody get a second chance. And there's just this bizarre performative contradiction at a certain point that's like, wait a second, so like a rapist who gets out of prison should have a second chance at, and like they shouldn't be denied a job because of that. But somebody who's guilty of bad tweets 10 years ago,
right,
like they shouldn't have it. And that's I think that's hard to wrap my mind around, just on its own terms, that combination of attitudes. And also, again, I think that the more we sort of present our critique of the society that we live in a personalized, moralistic, and often like harshly punitive way. I mean, oftentimes when I see people running this line, there's no such thing as cancel culture. There's just, consequences and accountability. There's something about those, like, all of that like talk of consequences and accountability that it's like,
that's 90s GOP shit. Like,
yeah, exactly. Right. Like,
yeah. I mean, there's something like, you alluded to this, but I mean, I think if you're, if someone who's on the left and wants to argue to their fellow comrades about this, about the cancel culture and cancel culture adjacent stuff, is like, cancel culture is neoliberal. It's like saying, it's like viewing people as atomized individuals and then saying like, okay, if we excise this bad person, then, and someone else comes into the role or something, then like we don't need to look at the system or the institution or the corporation or whatever. It's just like, okay, we scooped out, this young woman who would have been the Teen Vogue editor, and that seems like some sort of victory, when really nothing. Like what's the practical effect for anyone who's not her, and what has been changed? Really, very little. And yeah, it's just like it's focusing on people instead of institution systems and so forth. And I would think that Marxists would be attuned to this kind of thing more than other groups. But I guess it's just the incentives of online and other things point towards finding a human villain to exemplify the ills and then casting them out. I mean, that's part of human nature.
Sure. I mean, I think that might be something that like people in any political configuration, etc., would have a certain amount of tendency to do under any circumstances. I think it's exacerbated by some larger societal things right now, and I also think it's exacerbated by some of the problems with the way that the contemporary left is that we talked about, and also I think just some of the day-to-day dynamics of partisan politics in the United States, by which I mean that, like, even if your theoretical politics are way, way to the left of just ordinary liberalism, that doesn't mean that as you kind of experience the day-to-day stupidities of the culture war, you're not going to kind of reflexively identify with whatever the team that seems slightly closer to you seems to be saying about anything, and I think that often means that, like, some of the worst and dumbest things about contemporary American liberalism, you're going to get people in organizations that are to the left of liberalism that are not going to be immune from these things. Like that's just gonna happen, and it's worth something at the very least worth being aware of. So you try not to be, and I think that it does have offline consequences. Like I know we've been going for a while. I'm not sure how much longer you want to go, but like, just so I don't want to introduce a whole bunch of new stuff right now, but like just one quick thing that's a potential offline example would be the way that last year, for I think like certainly, and I'm not talking about like any kind of, we were talking about Marxism a minute ago, and I'm in this case talking about sort of much looser sort of social democratic, constellation, although also what I would argue is if you want to have more radical goals, you certainly have to start there. But I think that in 2020, there were a couple of incidents that really showed that the left is very vulnerable to being to just having people demand that they renounce certain figures on the basis of any kind of accusation, even, right, of doing anything bad. And I'm not even just talking about like spurious, like silly ones, like some of the ones we talked about today, but like, you know, even accusations that if they were true really would merit this kind of response. Like the obvious cases, which both involve congressional candidates, like who are going up against more centrist Democrats, would be Alex Morse and Shahid Buttar. In both cases, who were people who were accused of things ranging from like somewhat obnoxious and sexist to wildly inappropriate, you know, if they've been true.
Mm-hmm. Morris is the guy in Amherst, Mayor of Amherst or something, who, in brief, correct me if I'm wrong, someone sort of, there seemed accounts emerged that he was, hitting on, he is gay, he is hitting on younger men in an inappropriate way, some of them students at Amherst College, and he was like a adjunct or something, but it ended up coming out that it was all sort of like a hit job put together by these guys who wanted to get an internship with the sitting congressman. Wasn't that part of it? And that just like...
No, that was part of it, right? That's Ryan Grimm at The Intercept reported that, which by the way, is like, it's sort of at a right angle to the main thing we're talking about here, but like, that's just got to be the most contemptible thing ever, that you're going to try to like sort of entrap somebody and destroy their future for the sake of an internship. Like that's all it takes.
Yeah, it's sort of the ultimate in like the organization kid sort of ideology is that you would like libel and sabotage someone so that you could get an internship.
Yeah.
So that was a pathetic episode all around.
Exactly, and I think in the Shahid Buttar case, he was a long shot challenger against Nancy Pelosi in San Francisco, and there was the details are different, right? But I think that what the two cases have in common is that somebody is accused of doing something bad. The accusations are, if anything, pretty vague in both cases, right? Like they're put together in. Hold on, my dog is going nuts.
That's okay. Yeah, sure. We'll cut this out.
Everybody's getting vaccinated now, so we have like a friend over at the house, which is like the first time that's happened, and God knows. But so she's going nuts, about this unfamiliar person being there. But yeah, in both cases, like what they have in common is that there were some pretty vague accusations of wrongdoing that like were sort of calculated to sound really bad, but also weren't overloaded with details. And that there were various organizations, like the Sunrise Movement, for example, in the Alex Morse case, some progressive organizations in San Francisco in the Buttar case, DSA, various DSA branches in both cases, which is the one that most concerns me, as a member of that organization, who officially withdrew their support for these candidates, not after conducting some sort of thorough investigation and talking to witnesses and trying to figure out what had happened, but just based on the existence of the allegation. That's just all it took.
It's I think it probably derives from an admirable sense that we should, listen to people who say they are victims and, not dismiss them. And then there became this slogan like believe women or believe all women. Yeah. And obviously anyone who thinks about that for more than 2 seconds will realize like, well, that really doesn't make sense because, women are human also, and humans deceive and lie and so forth. But so at one point, and probably, not all that long ago, it would have been like, the unstated official position was disbelieve women. And like, if a woman accused a man of some sexual impropriety, it was like, oh, she's just doing this for attention, and certainly the various bad things that Bill Clinton did in his career played along with this kind of thing, that like any woman who was accusing him of something was just like trailer trash, do it for attention, that kind of thing. So then the reaction to that, makes sense.
It is actually amazing to think back to that, like how far the pendulum swung, because in the 1990s, look, even the Monica Lewinsky case, which where the behavior that was described was entirely consensual, but some of the other accusations against Bill Clinton were of things that weren't consensual, were harassment or worse, especially the Juanita Broderick case. But even in the Lewinsky case, I mean, if you were going to apply the standards that are used to say, oh, this adjunct professor who was hooking up with students who weren't even his students, and by the way, then it turned out the whole thing didn't happen, but whatever. Even the original allegation, that who were like, they weren't his students, but they were students at the same university that he would taught an adjunct class at.
Right.
Like, if you were going to apply that to the Monica Lewinsky thing, I mean, my God, President of the United States, intern. But back in the late 90s, the party line was that anybody who had a problem with this was a puritanical sexual McCarthyite.
Right.
And like MoveOn.org, like that organization was founded specifically to encourage people to move on from the Clinton sex stuff.
Yes.
So yeah, it swung wildly the other direction, and of course the correct place to stop would not have been where it was in the 90s, but it's also a big problem because if you're going to like, just as a manifestation of like the many ways that this kind of extreme moralism and willingness to sort of hair trigger, pile onto people and all of that can be politically counterproductive. I mean, this seems like a pretty straightforward one because, first of all, it's obviously unjust to people who are accused of things, because not all accusations are true. Like that's something that in other contexts I don't think we have any trouble understanding. But beyond that, it's also, I mean, strategically, it's a disaster because like, if you really believe any accusation that comes along, then you just made yourself the easiest mark in the world for anybody who wants to pull the sort of thing that those student Democrats, were apparently doing to Alex Morris.
Yeah. And I wonder if, this sort of, movement, loosely called cancel culture or something, started before the Trump presidency. But I do wonder if there was sort of a, the moralistic party is usually the conservative party. And then by embracing Donald Trump, the most amoral person who has ever lived on planet Earth, like, it sort of flipped and like, the I don't know, this is so sort of off the top of the dome, but sort of like the sense that like the left embraced moralism in politics because, as in part in reaction to the right abandoning it, and then you see as Trump has faded, like there's sort of a re-embrace by the GOP of moralism, and part of this also funneled into QAnon, because it was like those are people who like Donald Trump and couldn't deal with like the cognitive dissonance or something of this total amoral person being the GOP president, and so they said, oh, he's actually like undercover fighting against this cabal of pedophiles.
He was Jeffrey Epstein as part of a long-term sting operation.
Yeah, so there's people want some moralism in their politics, and like Trump scrambled this whole thing, and now that Trump is gone, hopefully forever, we'll see how these things reassert themselves. And certainly it makes more sense for Tucker Carlson to be angry about a moral transgression than for, people like a Marxist, any random Marxist to be angry about some moral transgression. So we've gone a bit longer than we intended, but there's one other thing I did want to ask, which is not connected to the book, but is connected to our current state of affairs and our current president, Sleepy Joe Biden, and just finished his first 100 days. Briefly, I assume you're surprised by how things have gone in this first 100 days, but how would what do you are you happy, pleasantly pleased, disappointed? What do you think?
I think there have been some good things that have happened. I wouldn't exaggerate. I think there's also been a lot of hype about how good it has been in some of these areas. That's pretty exaggerated in its own way. So basically, I think that certainly I think the left can like kind of get the Biden presidency so far wrong in at least two different ways. So one way of sort of bending the stick too far in one direction is to say that like nothing that's been done is good, and like it's because it's not possible that there's like anything that Biden has done that like Obama wouldn't have done or that Clinton would have done, that so like really if you look at it hard enough, like none of it is like that. It's just impossible that anything's gotten better, or even in the most extreme versions of this, it's impossible that Biden's done anything that like Trump wouldn't have done, right? Which is goofy, but there are people who insist on going there. So I think that's a mistake. I think that like you can acknowledge that somebody's your ideological nemesis, but also think that they're not like all of this stuff isn't frozen. The circumstances change, the strategies the different political factions are going to employ are going to change, and so you do need to be alive to that. But at the same time, I think there's a mistake that people make in the opposite direction where they like say, Biden has like really dramatically moved to the left, and like sometimes the left version of this move is to like want to take credit for it, right? Like look how far we pushed Biden to the left, and I think that that's a little too optimistic because it's certainly true that deficit hawkery is not anything like what it was in Washington D.C. 5 years ago. That there has been a dramatic shift on that, like how much money the government is willing to spend, on relief, and especially the stuff we like, relief for ordinary people, has really dramatically shifted, which is a good thing. It's a symptom of a lot of things happening that are very bad things, like a unprecedented public health crisis that led the economy to fall apart. But the thing itself is good. But also, I think that this idea that Biden has really moved, this far to the left, I think is a little implausible because that kind of deficit hawkery has really diminished across the board. I mean, if you look at the Republican positions in these budget negotiations, they're way like the Republican positions in budget negotiations now are like probably worse than Democratic positions were a few years ago, because again there has been this unprecedented crisis that's really shaken everything up, and I think a lot of political actors now say that okay, this really would be a disaster if we don't do something. So
credit to Trump for that, for a lot of it. I mean, he like 3 or 4 weeks into the pandemic, he like passed. It was like by a voice vote or something, like a huge relief package that included the first round of checks. And so, I mean, there were some...
By the way, if he'd done a second round of checks, I think there's an excellent chance he'd still be president now.
It's possible. I mean, his strange personality had mostly bad effects, but part of it is good. So one effect is that he actually doesn't have any ideology whatsoever. So he wasn't like, well, what would Milton Friedman say about this, the way like Paul Ryan might have or something. And then he also just wanted to do things that would make people like him, so like sending people to check that his name was on, that's a good way to get people to like you, but also he was just so generally incompetent and would be easily swayed by whoever was talking to him at any given time. But I think at least for the immediate future, budget hawkery is dead, and Donald Trump helped kill it, in addition to like the coronavirus
which he
playing a role.
A lot of people, which isn't great, but I think, which by the way, I mean, just to throw this quick little bomb before I go, I mean, like is one reason that I've thought for a long time that it's kind of crazy that so many, liberals and progressives and even people on the far left insist on saying that Donald Trump was a fascist, because I think a fascist would have seen COVID as a golden opportunity for a massive power grab and crackdown.
Yeah, my line on that has been fascism is an idea or ideology, and you would have to believe
Trump
in
doesn't
something
have any of those.
in order to
Yeah, yeah.
be a fascist. And Trump only believes in himself, and he's also too incompetent to seize
Yeah,
power.
well,
But
well, there's certainly that. I mean, it's like like during the interregnum between the election and the inauguration, there was all this, from my perspective, kind of unhinged speculation in certain quarters about how, like, oh, look, Trump has replaced such and such a person at the Pentagon, like that he's gonna do a coup. And I always thought that the best line about this came from Matt Taibbi, who said, look, it's not that I think Trump would morally object to doing a military coup. It's that even if he could somehow convince the generals to go along with it, within the first 2 minutes of plotting out strategy, he'd get bored and leave to go watch TV.
Pulling off a successful coup is probably pretty difficult, far beyond it.
But like what Trump did with COVID, like, I mean, the problem with Trump and COVID was the opposite of fascism. It was that he it was like mass murder by neglect, just like unwillingness to take any sort of meaningful government action whatsoever, beyond those initial checks and sort of and encouraging some lockdowns very early on, then doing a wild mood swing as he was so prone to.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that I think show. I mean, there was this whole long-running debate. Is Trump crazy? Is Trump stupid? Is he crazy like a fox? 11-dimensional chess. I mean, if you just think, like, if he had embraced mask wearing and his, there's 20% of the population would do whatever he says. If he had said wear a mask, they would have done it because Trump says to do it. And he was too stupid to see that this was important. And my personal pet theory, which sounds like a joke but isn't, is that he didn't want to wear a mask because it would have smudged his makeup. So that's why he didn't want to do it, and then so he didn't encourage it. I think that's true, and that's totally farcical if true, but I think it is true.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's he could have seized power in some way, but was too lazy, incompetent, stupid to do it. Okay, we've gone very long. I'll just say, Sleepy Joe has been less sleepy than I anticipated for sure. I thought, Trump was so bad that just sort of a return to normalcy kind of thing would have made most people happy, but he's done way more than a return to normalcy, and after some initial screw-ups, the vaccine rollout has been better than anywhere else in the world.
I think the COVID response has been obviously much more competent than Trump. I've got my criticisms, but definitely more competent than Trump. It's got and yeah, I think that the temporary relief has been good. I mean, I think that the real question, like, I think where I would say slow down a little bit with all the comparisons people want to make to the New Deal and the Great Society is that none of this has actually created any sort of permanent anything. It's just sort of like, trying to get us through a crisis, which, I mean, obviously I'm happy it's happening, but I'd also make some political distinctions here. And, if you ever want me back on to go through all of my complaints about Biden, I can certainly do that.
Yeah, we definitely, there's stuff in the book that we didn't get to. You have a chapter about Antifa. You have a chapter about, how, this thing happened at a DSA conference where people were told not to clap if they were happy or excited about something, but rather to snap, because there might be some people out there who have extreme sensitivity to sounds and so forth. And this ended up on Tucker Carlson. So there's more stuff in here that we didn't have a chance to touch on, but we have gone on for a while. So yeah, I'd be happy to have you back on at some point to talk
Absolutely.
about more of these topics. Okay, so the book, once again, Canceling Comedians, While the World Burns. Where can people find all your various online content if they want to?
Sure. So the simplest way to find all the online content is to go to benburgis.com as the kind of one-stop shop for everything, the show and the Jackman columns and everything else. And as far as the book goes, it's available all the usual book places. Given my own crazy radical commitments, the place that I would encourage people to buy it from is Red Emma's, which is a worker-owned bookstore in Baltimore. You can order books from online, so that's redemmas.org. But I prefer that you buy it from Amazon to not buying it.
Yeah, these are the compromises you have to make in a late capitalism, neoliberalism, whatever. Okay, so thanks for coming on, and people can follow me on Twitter if they want to, REACW. They can even rate and review this show in iTunes or Spotify, whatever, and that helps people find it. And also, as I mentioned in a previous episode, sometimes I get into little online tiffs with people on Twitter, and then they see the link in my bio to the podcast, and then they give it a 0-star rating as a way to get back at me. So I should probably not get into these kind of online tiffs that inspire people to do that. But since I find myself, doing it, giving the show a 5-star or at least not a 0-star rating, or even a review, is a way to fight back against the haters. And so people could do that if they want to. Okay, so thanks for coming on, Ben, and taking the time, and thanks to our viewers and listeners, and we'll see you again next time.
All right, thank you so much.